Fatiha. السلام عليكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين. مدد يا رسول الله، مدد يا سادة أصحاب الرحيم، مدد يا رحمة مشايخنا، مدد يا مولانا إن شاء الله قائد الأسعد شيخ محمد الرحمن. طريقتنا والصحبة والخير في الجمعية. Allah Azze ve Celle buyuruyor. Yeryüzü Allah'ın.
Allah Almighty says that the earth belongs to Allah Almighty.
Allah yolunda giderseniz Allah sizinle beraber olur.
And if you follow the way of Allah Almighty, then Allah Almighty will be with you.
Allah Azze ve Celle'nin yolundan çıkarsanız Allah sizin önünüze başka insanlar.
And if you leave the way of Allah Almighty, if you abandon the way of Allah Almighty, then Allah Almighty will replace you with new people.
Başkalar, Allah'ı seven insanlar.
Allah Almighty will replace you with people who love the way of Allah Almighty, who follow the orders of Allah Almighty.
Muhakkak onlar Allah Azze ve Celle'nin yolundan gider, dinine tutar.
If those who do not follow the way of Allah Almighty, Allah Almighty will replace them with the people who follow the way of Allah Almighty and fulfill the orders of Allah Almighty.
Bu böyledir. Ta her zaman aynı şekilde Peygamber Efendimizin zamanından sonra da.
Let there be no doubt about this. This is how things have developed over time, that people, nations were replaced with people who followed the way of Allah Almighty and fulfilled the orders of Allah Almighty.
Bu vaziyet böyledir.
And this has also continued after the time of our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him.
Dünya kafirlerin değil, Allah'ındır.
This world does not belong to the disbelievers. This world belongs to Allah Almighty.
Dünya Allah Azze ve Celle'nin
This world belongs to Allah Almighty.
olduğu için istediğini alır, istediğini kor.
And He, Almighty Allah, is the one who may take away whoever He likes, and He may put people into this world whoever He likes.
İstediğini yapar Allah Azze ve Celle.
It is Him, Almighty Allah, who may do as He likes.
Hiçbir kavm, bir millet biz yaparız ederiz derse,
no people, no nation may claim that they may do whatever they want to do.
Onların hiçbir kıymeti yok. Allah yolunda olamadıktan sonra.
It has no value if you do not follow the way of Allah Almighty.
O hiçbir faydası yok.
No matter what people or what a nation may claim, it has no value and it has no validity.
Kıymeti yok. Allah istediğini alır. Onun için Allah yolunda.
Because it is Him, Allah Almighty, who decides. And it is Him, Allah Almighty, who may take away from this world whomever He likes.
Olmak akıl işidir.
If you are mindful, if you have a mind and are intelligent and use your reason, then you follow the way of Allah Almighty.
Akılsızlık o yoldan çıkmaktır.
It is mindlessness and those who lack intelligence who leave the way of Allah Almighty.
Allah Azze ve Celle yolundan çıktın mı ne sana hayır kalıyor, ne ailene kalıyor, ne vatanına kalıyor.
If you leave the way of Allah Almighty, then there is no goodness, neither for yourself, nor your family, nor your nation.
Hayır. O Allah'a karşı gelmeyin. Allah Azze ve Celle
do not oppose Allah Almighty.
Size her şeyi vermiş.
It is Him, Allah Almighty, who gave you everything.
Allah Azze ve Celle her iyiliği istemiş.
And it is Him, Allah Almighty, who only wished good for you.
Siz kötülüğü istiyorsunuz.
But it is people who desire badness.
Kötülük isteyen hayır bulmaz.
Those who desire and seek badness where evil will not find goodness.
Tevbe edip Allah yoluna dönmek lazım.
People need to ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness and return to the way of Allah Almighty.
Hepimiz her gün Peygamber Efendimiz sallallahu aleyhi ve sellem diyor, en azından 70 tane estağfirullah çekin, tövbe estağfirullah.
Our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said at least ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness. Say astaghfirullah at least 70 times a day.
Biz affetsin Allah Azze ve Celle.
Ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness so that He Almighty Allah may forgive you.
Çıldırmış gibi yoldan çıkmak.
Don't leave the way of Allah Almighty going crazy.
Bir fayda etmez.
There's no benefit in going crazy and leaving the way of Allah Almighty.
Hem sonu kötü, hem başı kötü, hem ortası kötü olur.
If you leave the way of Allah Almighty, then the beginning for you will be bad, the ending will be bad, and whatever is in between in the middle will also be bad.
Allah muhafaza etsin.
May Allah Almighty protect us.
Görüyoruz. Bütün İslam aleminde çoluk çocuk hepsi şeytanın eline düşmüş.
And now we see throughout the entire world that Muslim children, they have become the victims of shaitan.
İçkisinden, uyuşturucusundan, sigarasından, yapından.
And Muslims have become the victims of shaitan, and they are under the control of shaitan. They are addicted to alcohol, to drugs, to cigarettes.
Marifet zannedip ilk başta öyle başlıyorlar.
And they start with cigarettes step by step, and they increase their addiction.
Şeytan kandırıyor.
And they are thus cheated by shaitan.
Ondan sonra yoldan çekiyor. Aileler perişan oluyor.
And then ultimately they leave the way of Allah Almighty, and they ruin their families.
Allah muhafaza etsin. Bunlar neden?
May Allah Almighty protect us from such a thing.
Çünkü Allah Azze ve Celle'ye karşı gelip,
and what is the root cause of this? It is because they opposed Allah Almighty.
Ona iman etmemekten.
And they opposed Allah Almighty and did not believe in Allah Almighty.
İman eden bu şeyler yapmaz inşallah.
And those who believe in Allah Almighty, who follow the way of Allah Almighty, will not do such terrible things.
Allah muhafaza etsin.
May Allah Almighty protect us.
Allah ıslah etsin.
And may Allah Almighty make those who are on a bad way return to a good way and make their situation be good.
Bizi başkalarının demiştirmesin inşallah.
And may Allah Almighty make us to be those who follow His way, and may Allah Almighty not make us those who are replaced by others who will follow the way of Allah Almighty, but may Allah Almighty make us constantly follow the way of Allah Almighty.
Allah tawfik. Al-Fatih.